This reaction today is a reaction to Joe Rogan interviewing David Mamet. They're talking about the Bible as myth.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Yes, I mean, it also goes back to the Enlightenment, to the idea that God doesn't exist, and the idea that human being is the measure of all things. Well, if the human being is the measure of all things, what does that mean? Our reason. And our reason is completely flawed. All of us do things every day which are unreasonable, sinful, wrong, and absurd, right?
Let's wait for Joe Rogan to say amen.
And the reasonable person says, wait a second, why did I do that? What do I have to refer to in my confusion and my self-loathing? Well, the Bible was a pretty good bet, for the Hebrew Bible for 6,000 years, right? The Christian Bible for 2,000 is a pretty good bet. Say, wait a second, let's talk about human nature. You really aren't that smart. You really aren't in charge of the world. You really aren't. Although you think you are, you think that because you're human. But God's in charge of the world, and there's a certain way things are. And if you'd like to get out of your wretched self-consciousness and self-delusion, you better get your ass into church.
But don't you think that, when atheists talk about religion and they criticize organized religion and criticize the Bible, they talk about things that are in the Bible that seem preposterous, right? They talk about people rising from the dead and walking on water, particularly the Old Testament, right? Like, to use that as a guidebook for life, you have to kind of ignore some of the stuff that doesn't make sense.
So he's alluding to something that David Mamet needs to be pressed on, and that is, if human reason is fallible and sinful and self-absorbed and absurd, then why do we trust it to let it loose in the Scriptures to come back with the hidden esoteric meaning that the Bible carries? In order for the Bible to function authoritatively over us, it has to be perspicuous. It has to be clear. And if you're treating it as a quarry from which we get the deep meaning of myth, then the chances are pretty good that you send 50 interpreters into the Bible to get that deeper meaning. You're going to come back with 53 different deeper meanings, and that's a problem. And I don't think David Mamet has a solution for that.
Well,
don't you think?
The Bible's a myth. Okay, the Bible,
right,
especially the Christian Bible comes out of the Jewish Bible. It's a retelling of the story in a different way. But the Jewish Bible is a myth, and the myth is the myth of creation and the myth of human experience. So what it does is, chapter by chapter, story by story, it challenges us with disturbing and bizarre images. And it says, why don't you try to understand this? See if you can understand this. What does it really mean to escape from Egypt? Does it mean escaping from your inner Pharaoh? What does it really mean to part the Red Sea? So these stories are told. Any myth is a dramatic retelling of an underlying reality that can't be expressed rationally.
So what he's doing here is something very similar to what Philo did in the 1st century BC, 1st century AD. Philo's life straddled the turning of the BC AD eras. The Greeks had grown embarrassed by the behavior of the Homeric gods, Zeus chasing all the skirts and everything. And so the Greeks had developed the allegorical method of interpretation because they were embarrassed by the literal meaning of their sacred stories. Philo was in a similar way embarrassed by some of the crudities of the Old Testament, and he did something very similar to what David Mamet is doing here. But the people who produced the Bible that Philo interprets this way and that Mamet interprets this way didn't interpret it that same way. If they did, they wouldn't have produced it.
right? So the atheists say everything can be expressed rationally. For example, you know that the earth is burning up. You can tell that because sometimes things get warmer and sometimes things get colder. You can also tell that when things get colder, that's obviously because the earth is burning up, because the sun is melting the glaciers and the glaciers are raising the temperature. You can also tell, of course, that to be fair to everyone, children change sex. You know that, don't you? And you can tell that men can compete as women and women compete as men. This is all human confusion because we trust our senses and we trust our mind, and the mind just, it doesn't work real good.
But why would our minds that could confuse something as plain and obvious as the difference between boys and girls, if human reason can screw that up, why can't we screw up an inscrutable myth? The Bible, the way he's approaching the Bible, what is the deeper inner meaning of the crossing of the Red Sea, or what is it to leave Egypt to get away from your inner Pharaoh? That esoteric meaning is a lot less obvious than that girls are girls and boys are boys. So if human reason can screw one up, then why are you trusting human reason to interpret the deep mysteries?
We're very cunning, but we aren't very smart, human beings. And that's the message of the Bible. And so if you look at Moses was, the Egyptians tried to kill him all of his life. The Egyptians tried to kill him. He didn't have any trouble with the Egyptians because God was on his side. He had trouble with the Jews because the Jews were always saying, who the hell do you think you are? So that's, all the Old Testament is the story of atheists, really, saying, who the hell do you think you are?
So when you're talking about the Bible, right? And the lessons in the Bible, isn't part of the problem is that people translated it from ancient Hebrew to Latin to Greek and all these other languages, and then eventually to English. Like a lot's lost along the way, right?
Now, this is a common mistake. Translations of the Bible of the Old Testament come straight from the Hebrew, from Hebrew to English, not Hebrew through Greek and Latin, but Hebrew to English, and the New Testament from Greek to English, or from, if it's a foreign language translation, from Greek to Spanish, or from Hebrew to Spanish.
And a lot is open to interpretation. Like a lot of what we're talking about in these myths and stories that people take as factual occurrences, they probably were some sort of there's some sort of a lesson in the myth, some sort of allegory. There's things about these stories that probably have hints of truth. But isn't it hard to kind of decipher it all if you can't speak the mother language?
That's a very good question. So I want to first let me ask you. Okay, I'm going to tell you a story. Okay.
Okay.
These two octopuses walk into a laundromat.
Okay.
See, that's what a myth is. I said two octopuses walk into a laundromat, and you didn't say, wait a second, octopuses can't walk and they wouldn't be in a laundromat.
Well, I thought about it, but I'm being polite.
So what you said is, yeah, tell me more. Okay.
I'm hoping there's a good joke.
Okay, well, I'll get to that. But it's the same thing with the Bible is really two octopuses walk into a laundromat. So I'm going to tell you a story. I want you to suspend your disbelief because there's something in this story you might get a kick out of.
The problem with this analogy here is that if you're telling a joke about the two octopuses walking into a bar, at some point you get to the punchline. And when you get to the punchline, the point is clear and obvious. If you have any kind of sense of humor at all, you're being beat over the head with the obviousness of it. But if you just had two octopuses walk, not into I said bar, two octopuses walk into a laundromat, if you do that and then you said, and then three Klingons walk into a bar, and then you said, and then three Argentinians walked into Times Square, and you just went from one to another, and the whole thing was one absurdity, you never get to the punchline. And that's what he's saying the Bible is, a chain of absurd jokes with no punchlines. And so you have to rely on the wisdom, your own shrewd, cunning wisdom that he's already rejected.
Mm-hmm. There might be some wisdom in it. There might yes and might no. But if you listen as you would to a story, which the Bible is, it's a myth, rather than to a factual retelling, you might get a kick out of it. Now, as far as a translation goes, I can read the Bible in Hebrew. I started learning when I was 40. It's easy language. And there are a lot of mistranslations But the main point is not the mistranslations, because there are some pretty good English translations too. But the main point is saying that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense.
So what do you think the Bible is? Do you think the Bible is a bunch of very wise people got together and they formed these stories to sort of illustrate the folly of mankind and how one needs to have like a moral compass and guiding principles that are set in stone, and that you have these rules to live your life in a moral and just way, and that'll make for a better society?
The Bible was not written in order to illustrate the folly of mankind, but to demonstrate the folly of mankind and to show and declare and make manifest the depravity of mankind and to show the only way out.
Like, what do you think the Bible actually is?
Well, a friend of mine, a rabbi, was a Reform rabbi, was applying to get into an Orthodox yeshiva, an Orthodox college, and he's a Reform rabbi. So the guy says, you have very good credentials and you're very well learned. Do you think the Bible is literally the work of God?
Yes, we do.
The rabbi says no. So the guy says, well, is it possible? Rabbi says yes. The guy says, okay, you're in, right? So there's Dennis Prager, who I'm crazy about, said the other day, he said, I don't believe in the Torah, the Jewish Bible, because of God. He said, I believe in God because of the Torah. So if you read the Torah, the Jewish Bible, and the Christian Bible is just an extension of that, you say, my God, this is incredible wisdom. This goes back to the beginning of time. People who've tried to figure out everything. And
Right.
they didn't have the language that we have, but they had the language that they had. And this was thousands of years of experience progressed and compressed into a myth. So we know that this is true because liberals have always been in love with the myths, especially Jews, with the myths of other cultures, right? We say how beautiful it is that this culture has that myth, that the Haida Indians say the world was formed by a large beaver, and when the beaver slapped his tail like that, it made the oceans, and when the blah, blah, blah. It's gorgeous myth. Mm-hmm. Nobody says of that myth, wait a second, you can't have a beaver that big, right?
That's what I would say.
Yeah, okay.
I would step in and go, hey, man.
So the bottom line here is, as Tolkien explained to Lewis the night that Lewis was converted, the fact that something is mythic, the fact that the Bible contains myth, which actually it does not mean that it's not factually, historically true. Jesus died on the cross and was buried, and he rose again from the dead in history. The empty tomb is a historical fact. That doesn't mean that it is excluded from being a transcendental myth. The creation account and Adam and Eve in the garden, I have no problem accepting that as mythic. It's a wonderful myth. But we have to be careful using words like that, because in modern English parlance, mythical means imaginary, or you're daydreaming, or you're making stuff up. No, we accept the Bible as literally, foundationally, absolutely true. And some of the elements are mythical. But just because it's mythical doesn't mean it didn't actually happen. Adam and Eve, literal Adam and Eve, mythical Adam and Eve, Christ died and rose again from the dead. That is, as Lewis would put it, myth become fact. If you are enjoying these videos and would like to support this channel and the work of Canon Press, join up at Canon Plus. Just click the link, create an account, and have a look around. If you use the restrooms, leave a dime on the counter.